It's just an awful wreck that took everybody's breath away with Ryan Newman. Do you have an update at this point on the status for Ryan and where he is health-wise?
Well, I mean, last night was the best update possible, which is, the scenario we all feared was not what it was. And so you heard that just a second ago from Steve O'Donnell, Vice President of NASCAR, and said non-life-threatening injuries. I actually just chatted. I'm here at Halifax Health, the hospital right across the street from Daytona National Speedway, and I chatted with some of the executives from Roush Fenway Racing just a few seconds ago as they arrived here at the hospital. And I don't think there's going to be any updates today. Now it's just a wait and see to see, exactly what all they're dealing with. But the good news is that Ryan Newman is still with us. And if I'm being 100% honest, I've been coming to this is my 25th Daytona 500. And if I'm being honest with you guys, last night I thought I was going to be delivering very bad news, and that was not the case.
Talking to Ryan McGee with us. And Ryan, when was the point where it got there for you? Because we are used to seeing wrecks in NASCAR. We are used to that being a part of the normal course of action in some instances. But when did this one seem to take that next step to something where you thought the news could be grave?
Well, it's interesting, Mike, because you're standing in victory lane, and it's the worst place to watch the race from. And you can't see the racetrack. There's one section of the track where you can see the cars come down the front stretch just past the start-finish line, but you're kind of in a cage. You're in this fenced-in area in victory lane, and there's one television monitor. And so when it happened live, yes, it looked bad, and I saw the car go by. But if I'm being honest, February 18th, 2001, this day, 19 years ago, is when Dale Earnhardt died, and no driver has died in a NASCAR National Series race since that day. And we've got a little spoiled. And so when the crash happened, your first instinct is, hey, who won the race? Because we've gotten used to everyone just being able to walk away. But then once I saw the replay, what I was concerned about was, if you're a race fan, the one place that you don't want to have hard contact is right in the driver's side window. And when he went airborne and came back down, Corey LaJoie, by no fault of his own, it drove right through that window. And so that's the concern, because if there's a soft spot in that race car, and if there's a vulnerable spot in that race car, that's where it is. And so that's where the concern was. And so I immediately am thinking, severe head injuries, all that stuff that we used to deal with, right up until Dale Earnhardt's death. And so that was where the concern was. And listen, I want to say this too. A lot of people were taking a lot of shots at Denny Hamlin and at Joe Gibbs Racing for celebrating their Daytona 500 win. But the reality is they had no idea what was going on. And I can tell you guys firsthand, Joe Gibbs was standing right next to me in victory lane, and he refused to cross the rope to go to where the celebration was going to happen until he had an update on Ryan Newman. And he never crossed that rope. And so the team didn't know. It's chaos after the race. And so once everyone had any idea the severity of the situation, that victory lane was shut down, in a matter of minutes. And so people trying to fill this 2-hour gap where there wasn't a lot of information, and in the Twitterverse era, they fill it with anger. And I'm telling anybody who's angry at Joe Gibbs Racing and Denny Hamlin, they don't know what they're talking about.
Well, that's where Twitter's at its worst. There's no doubt about it. And it was your interview and reporting that we all got to say, okay, because listen, we are casual racing fans. We all three of us will sit here and say we honestly don't know how it all works, and your explanation really helped us open our eyes about that. Along those lines, the way racing is now, the overtimes that they have and how aggressive they are, the first overtime saw an immediate 2 cars going to the infield, and they had to stop that, and then they start the second one. So, and then we see this horrific crash. Was this anybody's fault? Blaney was the one behind him. Was there anybody who was at fault, if anyone, for this wreck?
No, and what's interesting too, and thank you for those kind of words. What's interesting too, Mike, is that there were all the crashes leading up to the big one at the end, and when you're covering a race, you go stand by the infield care center. If you're in a crash and you have to go, it's mandatory. You have to go see the doctor. And I was talking to Brad Keselowski about one of the earlier crashes right before the big one, and I said to Brad, I go, we're all breaking down this crash, and it was a crash caused by his teammate. Joey Logano, and we're all breaking down this film. And I said to Brad, I've never asked a race car driver this until last night. Does it do you any good to really go back and dissect whose fault it was? Because everybody agrees Daytona's Daytona, and it's just a different animal. And the rules here are different than there are anywhere else. And it's the biggest race of the year, all that stuff. And Brad goes, it absolutely helps to just see what maybe I could have done differently. He goes, but at the end of the day, it's just roulette. And they kept, and Jimmy Johnson used that word, roulette. And so I think that they will all look at the film and they will try to figure out what happened. But the nature of this racing, the nature of these cars, the nature of the Daytona 500, the nature of it being the last couple of laps, at the end of the day, it's trite to say, but it's a racing deal. It is.
We're talking to Ryan McGee of Marty and McGee on the Shell Penzo Performance Line. Don't forget, check out Marty and McGee Saturdays from 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio and the SEC Network. I'm going to ask you to do the impossible here and turn the page to one thing before we let you go. Obviously, Denny Hamlin just did something historic, just did something incredible. Put a little perspective, aside from the wreck, to just take a moment and put a little perspective on what Denny Hamlin just accomplished.
Denny Hamlin has won 3 Daytona 500s in 5 years, which Richard Petty's the only one that's done that. He became only the 4th driver since this track opened in 1959 to win back-to-back Daytona 500s, and 2 of the other 3 are in the Hall of Fame, and you could have a pretty good argument for Sterling Marlin. And I talked to Denny Hamlin about it in Victory Lane, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, by the way, did it in one of the closest finishes in NASCAR history. And I asked him about it, and he said, listen, I can't digest it right now. And part of that was because of Ryan Newman, and part of it was because he just looked at me and he goes, my name does not deserve to be alongside those other names, but it does. And, you know, there's always this debate of who's the greatest race car driver that never won a championship. And right now, I think the answer to that is Denny Hamlin. It's the last thing left on the resume. But, yeah, you win 3 Daytona 500, you will roller skate into the NASCAR Hall of Fame when you're done.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports, highlights, and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.